Greetings and welcome to Beatles Stuffology, where two old friends sit around and talk BS, Beatles stuff, on a track-by-track basis, pretty much for the sake of it. My name is JG McQuarrie. I'm here with my co-host Andrew Deacon. Say hi, Andrew.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Getting old. How are you doing?
I'm getting old as well. That's the funny thing with chronology, that it does tend to go in that direction, unfortunately.
Okay, well, I feel like I'm getting older more quickly than I have been up until this point. But maybe some of that is sort of inspired by the sheer volume of well-known people that appear to be dying. And I'm not necessarily certain if that's due to the fact that there are just more famous people dying that we're aware of because of our age, or maybe it's just that there's this growth of people who became very, very famous in the entertainment industry, who've reached a certain age, who are starting to die off. But since we were meant to record this a couple of weeks ago, dear listener, and in that time we have lost Tina Turner, Chaz Newby, and Rolf Harris, all with rather prominent Beatles connections. So, although I did write down for Tina Turner that the main connection was the Phil Spector thing. I know there's the Come Together cover that we'll talk about, obviously, in about 3 years' time. But, you know, it's interesting listening to the stories about how Phil Spector basically wanted to work with her and not Ike, and it was a case of get out, Ike. Tell you what, I'll put your name on the record, but I'm not putting you on the record, which is quite interesting. So clearly one abuser recognised another.
Yes, like recognizes like.
Yeah. Speaking of which, of course, you know, Rolf Harris apparently was really, really horrible to, or didn't like the Beatles mucking around in I think a London Palladium show. I think that story came from the Craig Brown book. It's worth digging that one out again because it shows quite nicely at that stage what a slightly self-centered person he could be. But of course, Chaz Newby's slightly different because he didn't give up his the life that he wanted when he could have gone to the Beatles with the Beatles to Hamburg in, what was it, 1960? So he would stay behind and go to university. And do you know what? Good on him. Hope he lived a really good life as a result. And you sort of think that you know, it's a shame, obviously, for Pete Best that he has obviously been scarred by what happened. But I don't think Chaz Newby was, from what I could tell. He sort of, you know, almost celebrated the role that he played, but wasn't exactly bitter about the role he could have had.
No, which is a nice change. It makes a pleasant change to have somebody who's just comfortable with their place in history rather than sort of mourning what could have been. So by all reports, he seems to have been a decent guy.
Yeah. So yeah, that's our in memoriam section. Yeah, I really can't work out whether it is just the explosion of showbiz in the 50s and the 60s that means that we've got these people in their 70s and 80s and I suppose 90s as well who are shuffling off this mortal coil. But it does seem to be developing pace, and even, you know, actually I think personally the one that I would say affected, if that's the right word, me the most was Andy Rourke, bassist of the Smiths, who is 59. And it sort of follows on from one or two others, and obviously Terry Hall, who died, this year, and a couple of years ago, Mark Hollis, the genius that is Mark Hollis of Talk Talk. And you sort of think, well, actually, okay, well, these are people from the generation that we were watching when we were growing up and developing our love of music in the very late 70s and then early to mid 80s as well. And suddenly that sense of mortality starts to creep in. There you go. Yep, cheerful start to the show, folks. Ooh,
yeah,
okay.
Rourke was a difficult one because, I mean, even Morrissey managed to say something nice about him passing away, and that alone is a major achievement. Although, as always, as we always must say, fuck cancer. But yeah, it's one of those things. But that does start us off with a suitably melancholic air for a song which we're discussing today, which also manages to capture a rather downbeat sense, and that would be "I'll Be Back."
Does it though? In what way? I mean, lyrically, it doesn't really capture a melancholic sense. I think it wants to, but lyrically, it is completely all over the place, as we'll touch on later.
Yeah.
And is there a sense of melancholy in the music itself? As our resident music expert, over to you.
Expert. Barely even an amateur. But yeah, I would say that there's a lot of A minors, slightly bluesy E7s in there, F sharp minor, B minor. There's a lot of melancholy in the chords, but I think also just in that weird time signature as well, which is kind of 6/8, I think, or 3/4 in the beginning, and then shifts to 4/4, and then kind of pulls back again to the sort of 6/8. That weird little shift. It's slightly, I hesitate to use the word disconcerting, but it's not just a straightforward kind of downbeat song like, say, I'm not down. I think I was going to say things we said today. It's not a downbeat song per se, but it does have that kind of slightly melancholic air hovering about it. And the shift in the key signatures definitely lends it that, leaning hard also on those kind of minor and seventh chords. So yeah, I think there is something quite melancholy about the music. I'm interested to have the discussion with you about maturity, because this song is so often cited as being a sign of the maturity and the development of the Beatles. Do you agree with that? Do you think that's something that stands up to analysis?
No, but we can discuss that.
Don't sugarcoat it.
I just want to make reference to something you're talking about, because you're using terminology, and what I'm interested in is whether or not Lennon would have been aware of that when he was writing it. Because I've been listening again to the audiobook of the George Martin biography by, I'm going to say, Mr. Womack. I can't remember the first name off the top of my head. Anyway, it's very good. Apart from the fact that the person doing the audiobook, I hope it's not Mr. Womack himself, is just an atrocious reader with awful intonation. I want to hold your hand is an example I've referred to before. But but in that book, it makes reference to the fact that when they were doing the Hard Day's Night, when George Martin was doing Hard Day's Night score, he was asking Lennon for about specific notes and chords that he'd used in certain songs. And he'd say, oh yeah, is it this? And he'd go, no, it's not that. Oh, but it must be this. No, it's not that. And the basic point was, of course, that they didn't have the same level of musical knowledge, but what they did was that they knew what they liked. So would they have had the knowledge to be able to say, okay, right, well, this is a deliberate thing we're doing here? Or are we ascribing it after the fact?
I think in this case it is deliberate, yes. Particularly, I mean, Lennon himself has referred to this as being influenced by Del Shannon's Runaway. And that song does have it's not exactly the same, but it does have a relatively similar tone to it. So if Lennon was intentionally trying to invoke that, then yeah, I would think in this case it's definitely something deliberate. He actually mentions that in the very last interview he gave, the Playboy one in 1980. He mentions that this song is influenced by Runaway. And yeah, so in this case, he might not have been able to ascribe the technical names to it in terms of time signature changes and all that kind of stuff. But I think in this case, yeah, I think it's definitely fair, based on what he has said, that he was intentionally trying to generate that effect. How much do you think that carries through to other parts of the song? Well, that's a question that we'll get to. But I think musically, the attempt to have this more downbeat, more melancholic atmosphere around it is intentional, and something Lennon would have understood at the time.
Okay, I mean it's definitely quite somber, isn't it, in terms of its feel? But
somber is a good word for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I just sort of wonder if we're almost putting too much pressure on one individual song. And there are lots of people who Ian MacDonald's one of them, who sort of, ascribe some sort of, future significance to this, as though it is absolutely the sign of things to come. And I don't know. I wonder if sometimes we end up in this revisionist world where we're seeing things that perhaps aren't necessarily there. I mean, we are seeing in a very quick period of time some incredible changes in their songwriting. But when I think of maturity, and I'm not just talking about lyrically here, I'm also talking in terms of song construction. I'm thinking of things like Yesterday or, In My Life. And I'd say that this feels closer to something like, You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, for example. It's in the sense that it's trying to go for some, maybe it's trying to go for something that's a little bit more mature, but still has that element almost of pastiche to it.
Yeah, I think there is an element of that to it. I think one of the things that's most obvious is the tension between the music and the lyric, because I don't think the lyric is particularly sophisticated. I don't think it's bad, but I think it's on a par with the rest of the material on the album. If you break my heart, I'll go, but I'll come back again. I mean, it's pretty straightforward stuff, and I don't really mean that to sound pejorative, although I'm aware that it did. But it's not a particularly advanced lyric. It's a fairly standard story of, oh, my love has left me, oh, but I hope you'll come back again, blah blah blah. It's fine, it works well, especially given the sort of weird structure of the song, but it's not anything revelatory. And I have a lot of sympathy with the idea that we can be very ahistorical about the way that we look of these, because it's so hard to interpret things as they would have been. But it's the mind game that you have to play. If you were in 1964 and you listen to this, you have no knowledge of, You've Got to Hide Your Love Away or whatever is going to come after. I think of this song as being the father of No Reply. I think No Reply is kind of a tidied up version of this song. They're very similar in atmosphere, very similar in structure, and very similar in lyrical content, but No Reply is a little bit tighter. It's a little bit more disciplined as a song. But you wouldn't know that listening to this when you got to the end of the album in 1964. So would you listen to this and think, oh, this certainly signifies a whole new direction that the band could go in? Or would you think, oh, that was a weirdly downbeat endbeat to what was otherwise a fairly chipper album? And that's kind of how you have to look at it. Those thought experiments aren't often easy to do, though, because there's simply so much knowledge around the Beatles. How do you put yourself back in that position where you think, oh, well, actually, I've never heard Help at the album. I've never heard, Beatles for Sale or whatever. It's almost impossible to do. But I think looking at this song, it is one where you need to kind of have that discipline. Was this really pointing to the future in 1964 more than any of the other songs on the album? I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I'd agree. Yeah. I think it has been given slightly undue prominence. I think possibly because of where it's positioned on the album. Because obviously it was George Martin's intention to end with something really upbeat on albums. That's something he'd spoken about in terms of the sequencing of the songs, that you kind of hide some of your less strong material near the end, and then you go out with something that's incredibly strong, as we can see that they did on the first two albums. Whereas here, it's something completely different. That's partly because of the fact that all the songs from the film are on side one, so then he's working with what's left. But it is a change in that respect. And actually, what I find interesting about this song is that there are bits of it that I really like, and there are bits of it that just don't work for me. And this is without talking about the lyrics. And, we'll talk about the lyrics. We'll get onto the lyrics. And I've divided it up quite neatly in the bits where there are harmonies, the sections that start with you, effectively the verse. I think that really works. You've got that really sort of, effective rhythm guitar going on in the background. You've got actually quite sophisticated, mature harmonies going on. But then when you then move into, I don't even know what to call the other verses, the ones that start with I, and then when you start leaping around with the melody, it just doesn't work for me. It feels like this is a song in desperate need of a bridge. And that perhaps, with a little bit more time or with a little bit more intention in the studio, without the impending tours and, Ringo's underlying illness, that perhaps they might have had a bit more time to have worked something out and to have made it more effective. So I think, as far as the verses go, I really like, apart from the lyrics, the way the verse goes. I really like it. I'm not going to be mean on the lyrics, by the way, but I think it's the perfect example of things that I've spoken about in previous episodes. But here, for me, if you break my heart, I'll go, that bit I really like. I like that melody. But then we go to I love you so. I think, oh, John, here we go again. Okay, please. Oh, look, we're going to get an O to take us back to the verse. Are we, John? Okay, right. You're trying a bit too hard. Just a bit too hard.
Yeah, I think that weird structure of it probably is related to how quickly this was written and recorded. And again, that's why I tend to think of this song as being the father of No Reply, which pulls similar tricks to greater effect, I would argue. But the weird jumps, I don't know, I understand why people like them, but I also find it I'm a little bit with you. I find it a little bit hard to get on board with them. They're not bad. I think the shift in time signature is really effective. And again, just great but understated work from Ringo there, just keeping everything nailed down, keeping everything together on a track where he's really not prominent at all. And if you listen to either of the versions on Anthology, there's a breakdown and there's a more straightforward, complete take on it. And both of those, they don't quite come up to the quality of the one which ended up in the album. So there's definitely a sense where they got it right, and Ringo is a really important part of that. But it's not, I don't know, it's a bit of almost an affectation in a way to try and give the song somewhere to go when it doesn't really have anywhere to go. Is that too harsh?
Do you sometimes feel as though people are a bit too keen to ascribe genius status to John Lennon, when at this stage in his career he was a good and sometimes great songwriter and a good but not necessarily a great vocalist, and that actually as he got better as a songwriter, and perhaps you could argue that he understood more about what his voice could do, he wrote songs that allowed him to express himself less through his nose and more through his emotion. But I just sort of sometimes wonder if we try too hard because, he's the one that isn't with it. I know George, etc. But because he died so young and terribly, terribly missed, that everything then accrues much greater significance than it actually had. And it's fine.
It's the answer to that question. But it also depends if you're grading on a curve, because as we mentioned in a lot of episodes now, they're much better than anybody else.
Yeah.
Their worst songs are most people's best songs. But at the same time, the fact that they're the best of what's going on at that point doesn't necessarily mean that it's the best of all time. So it depends if you're grading on a curve or not, I suppose. And, we've come across some truly outstanding material, but we've come across some real duds as well. That's, of course, the nature of doing this. And I think it's okay to be honest and admit where, even where we have these people who we admire and love and all the rest of it, sometimes they're going to come up short, and not every single song can be, oh, well, it's the work of a tortured genius cut short in his prime, etc., etc., and it's not just Lennon that's true for, you could make the same argument about Kurt Cobain or whoever you want, Ian Curtis, pick your dead star. But it's I understand why it's hard to resist that temptation, but I think if we're going to have any degree of critical honesty, and that's not something that this podcast aspires to, but if we are, then that temptation is one that needs to be resisted.
Are you looking for some sort of furious debate? Because I'm broadly in agreement there.
No, feel free to move on to something else.
Scarcity, I think, does help, doesn't it? If someone is no longer with us, they're not producing, and therefore, but so okay, right. At that point,
we'll never get John Lennon's Travelling Wilburys.
Yeah, I may have said some relatively disingenuous things about ELO on Twitter last night whilst watching Top of the Pops on BBC4, which obviously has the Travelling Wilburys connection, because I never got ELO. I never got them.
I don't like ELO either. I've never liked ELO, and I do not understand what the fuss is.
No, and And I think the tweet that I actually regretted, and I'm not going to delete it because that'd be pointless, was that I think I put something along the lines. Well, it doesn't really matter because there's only about 2 rabbits and a cat that follow me on Twitter anyway. It was something along the lines of that I've narrowed it down. I've worked out what it is that I don't like about them. I've narrowed it down to the look and the music. Which I think is probably a fair enough thing to go for. But there's a lot of the rock orchestration that just sort of reminds me of for some reason Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds. I can't get Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds and Jeff Lynne's ELO divorced in my brain, but it seems to be that same.
They're both trying too hard.
Yeah, and the falsetto voice and Hey, look, it works for millions of people, and they had great fun at Glastonbury and a few years ago, and the opening of Guardians of the Galaxy 2 and yay, all of that sort of stuff. So, they bring joy and pleasure, but this is the nature of music. Is there would have been someone at the start going, how did you crowbar in Andy Rourke? Good, Smiths. Oh, God, they're so... Okay, fine. You don't like it? I do. Let me have my things. I'll let you have yours. Perhaps as long as
just
they're
let
not
people enjoy things.
Exactly. Unless, of course, it's something to do with Roger Waters. But less said about him, the better at the moment.
Yes. Let's just draw or ever.
Dear, yeah.
Sorry, Pink Floyd fans.
One in 3 episodes have something about his lyrics on here. So Anyway, speaking of lyrics, good. Right. So this is, I think, almost the peak example of a song where the actual words and the meaning of the words don't matter more than the fact that certain key words are used, and that sets the tone. So we've got break my heart, go, goodbye, come back, want you, and you've got all of those sort of words in that basically show you, without you having to listen to every single word, that it's someone who's sad, that there's that somber feeling. But actually, when you look at them, you realise that it is an example of a song that makes no sense. It's just using words that are there to provoke an emotion. So I've summarised the lyrics, and perhaps, dear listener, if you've quickly press pause and then Google the lyrics, have them up on your screen as you're listening, and we'll see how you've done. See how I've done, rather. So basically, here we go. I'll leave you if you dump me, but I won't leave, because I've left before and come back. Oh God, please don't do this to me, because I really need this. I beg you not to break my heart. I promise you I'm not pathetic, even though I am. I'm just talking crap now, and it makes no sense. It's just a means of me getting back to the verse, oh, 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 oh. Please don't break my heart. I'm not pathetic, even though I am. Should I stay or should I go? Oh, 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 oh. If you're mean to me, I'll go, but I'll come back, because that's just what I do.
Yeah, I think that pretty much summarises it.
It makes no sense.
No,
but it doesn't have to.
Lot. No, but they're evocative. That's the whole thing. They manage to evoke a feeling without needing to make any kind of literal sense, and there's no narrative through line to it either.
No, because it's so wildly inconsistent. But it doesn't matter. There's that whole thing about how too much meaning can be given to these things, and even then, when we go forward and we'll look at songs like "You've Got to Hide Your Love Away" or "Nowhere Man," and in the end, you'll just sort of realise that they don't mean anything. It's just someone trying to sound like it means something, but underneath all of it, it doesn't actually mean anything, and that's fine. That really is fine, as long as you enjoy listening to it. I've got nothing more on that.
Well, I mean, the ultimate the ultimate expression of that is likely to come when we get to "I Am the Walrus," but that's going to be a whole discussion in and of itself.
No, I don't know. We've got his whole Dylan pastiche phase to come.
Oh yeah. We've got plenty of material to work with when it comes to this.
Yeah. And and so what? And so what? Actually, interestingly, on the Womack biography, the points put across about this song that Lennon didn't actually know how it was end, and I like this as well. Apparently, according to George Martin in this biography, the story goes that the band would know how it was ending when Lennon said, because he would just sing "oh oh" 8 times, which sort of figures that he would do that kind of thing.
It also explains that very abrupt fade.
Well, actually, the fade is quite interesting again because it's quite. It's quite gentle. It's quite evocative. It's again different from the previous albums. So again, therefore, we're looking for that deeper meaning. But it is a different thing to do when in reality they probably just couldn't find a proper way to completely finish the song.
Yeah, which is fine. Happenstance and the appropriate ending are happy to hold hand in hand. They probably could have found a better way of saying that. You know what I'm trying to say. The happenstance of it works out. It's a serendipitous thing. There we go. That's a more tidy way of saying it. But yeah, it still works effectively. I'm interested to hear what you think about Lennon's vocals in this, given that you tend to be quite critical of Lennon's voice.
Oh, I'm just going to refer you back to my earlier remarks that in that verse, and anything that starts with "you," I think works, but the way it's just him singing, and I think it's primarily because of the leaps he has to make, and also it just kind of jars with me slightly. I have a little bit of an issue, as we may have discovered, with some early Lennon singing attempts that are just trying a bit too hard, just reaching a bit too hard. But one half of it, I think, really effective. One half of it, yeah, John, let's have another go.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't have much to contribute on the question I managed to ask myself, so I think it's sufficient. I don't know that I would go much further than that. I know that in the anthology version, the breakdown version, he complains that he's written something which is too difficult for him himself to sing. Although he does eventually manage it, but that in and of itself may tell a story.
Have you normally one of us at least does this? I've got a funny feeling that neither of us this time. Cover versions? Have you had a look?
No, I haven't scraped up against any cover versions this episode, I'm afraid.
Ooh, okay, should we do it live on air then?
Oh, go for it. Go on.
Listener, you may hear me typing away in the background. I'll say that so that JG doesn't have to furiously edit it out and remind me.
I'll find some way of editing round stuff.
Oh no, leave it in. It's all the better for it. So,
well, it's runtime on a short episode.
Well, yeah. Dear. Oh, there's another Barbara Dixon. Did Barbara Dixon do a Beatles cover album by any chance?
Yeah, she did. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Fair enough. UB40. Blimey. Okay. Something worth investigating there. No, there's nothing much that's sticking out there. Just quite a few tribute artists. Sean Colvin. Okay. Yeah. I'm quite intrigued by what Dwight Twilley sounds like, but I suspect I probably know. There is apparently a Cliff...
I'm going to go ahead and guess.
Yeah. And there is, in April 1967, a Cliff Richard version. At some point, I'll dip into those.
I'll look forward to your analysis.
Yeah, there won't be analysis. There may be chocolate.
Well, I look forward to you slagging them off then.
Yeah. The usual. It's the usual set, really, isn't it? Yeah, lots of Beatle tributes.
Yeah.
I'll be surprised if that section remains in the podcast, to be honest.
Well, we'll see. We'll see where we go once I've done some judicious trimming.
Nothing wrong with a tight 20.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. Anything else to add?
Well, no. I mean, the only thing I'm really thinking of perhaps the things that we'll cover when we talk about the album. Because, obviously we've got, this is part of the group of songs that was recorded right at the end. So in early June. So there are different phases to the album's recording. It's one of those songs that's quickly put together in order to get a 13, 14 track album. And so, considering that there's a different feel perhaps to some of these songs, as there is to the songs that appear on side one. And I think there's something in that, but I suspect that's something that we will come back to on another day. There you go, training that for you, listener.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate all your good work and all the setups that are going on here. But let's kill this one before it kills us. So what do you want to give it?
6.
Fair enough. I seem to be saying that a lot this episode. Bugger it, I'll give it 6 as well. Yeah, fine. I don't have strong arguments other than what we've already said. Yeah, 6 is fine, I guess. Right, lovely. Good. Well, just before we get on to our next episode announcement, you can, as always, really get a hold of us. You can contact us by email. We are BeatlesStuffology@gmail.com. We are on Twitter @Beatles_ology. And you can find my blog at www.jgmcquarrie.scot, where I write about films and TV and pop culture stuff. Now, with actual content. Please also check out Andrew's writing at www.stuffology.co.uk. Also, please check out my other podcast, which is Talking Trek to You, where a noob and an expert go through the original Star Trek series episode by episode. Please like, rate, and review this podcast on whatever podcast you're using so that more people can find it. Next week, we are going to be doing double shift. So we are not only going to be talking about the album as a complete set, but we are also going to be talking about the movie as well. So hopefully you will join us for some movie talk and for some album talk. But until then, keep listening.